Africa's largest country spans an area of 2.4 million square kilometers, yet almost no one is aware of its existence. The world has given it a harsh nickname, the North Korea of the Sahara. Closed off, inaccessible, entry is forbidden. But that's a lie. Behind the border checkpoints and visa restrictions lies a corner of mystery never mentioned in the headlines. Roman amphitheaters, a universal heritage still standing. Ancient cedar forests, venerated as sacred even before the empires. A Mediterranean coastline untouched by cruise ships and resort chains, longer than Spain's. 7 UNESCO World Heritage Sites scattered across a landscape so diverse, it shouldn't exist within a single country. In this rugged, mystery-shrouded landscape, where civilizations and climates blend together like swans, life holds up a mirror to human nature. This is Algeria. Not the terrifying Algeria reflected in news cycles and geopolitical analyses, the Algeria that greets you when you arrive. You can have breakfast while feeling the salt of the sea. By lunchtime, you're in the mountains where the air is crisp and cool. At sunset, you watch the sand dunes take on nameless hues. All in a single day, all in a single country. Most countries have a single climate, a single landscape, a single story. Algeria has 3, perhaps 4. Which story will your soul belong to? The Mediterranean coast is in chaos. 5 million people crammed into a city climbing up slopes like fire. Noise, traffic, shouts, the smell of diesel, fish, and overcrowded humanity. Do you think the conditions for survival and living in peace could be suitable for human nature? Drive 2 hours inland and the noise fades. Buildings disperse. The air changes. You're now on a plateau, surrounded by such complete silence that you can feel its weight. Ancient Roman cities stand here, abandoned. Their stones still retain their shape, even after 2,000 years, yet their spirit is even more preserved than their form. Keep driving south. The plateau ends. Life begins to shift dimensions. The soil changes color. The vegetation vanishes. The temperature rises. And suddenly, you're on the edge of a place that resembles another planet. The Sahara. Not the Sahara of postcards and camel rides. The real Sahara. The Sahara that doesn't care whether you're there or not. This is what happens when you set foot in Algeria. The country doesn't introduce itself gently. It doesn't put you at ease. It hits you with such sharp, cutting contradictions. Algiers captivates you with its white walls, white light. It evokes a sense of white warmth. Then there's the blue of the sea. 5 million people live here. They've piled up on the hills and in the valleys as if trying to escape the water. Laundry hangs on every balcony. Every rooftop has a satellite dish. This is not a city hiding from the world. This is a city the world has stopped looking at. The boulevards are lined with palm trees. Traffic never stops. Buses and taxis weave through each other as if dancing. Arched passageways from the French colonial era stand alongside concrete apartment blocks. Every few hundred meters, a mosque's loudspeaker echoes the call to prayer from the buildings every hour. The city chirps like a bird, not out of joy, out of energy. The sound of a capital that has absorbed every century thrown at it, transforming each into a layer of concrete and noise. Beneath the main streets, as if screaming its French colonial past, trains glide past facades that could belong to Marseille or Nice. In the streets where empires left their marks, Ottoman fountains still drip water. At the fishing port, wooden boats bump against the pier. Salt and diesel mingle with the cries of seagulls. Algeria is made up of layers. Every empire left something behind. Each generation combined its spirit with its labor, continuing to build upon what came before. Isn't that an ancient tale? Civilizations are built with blood, sweat, and tears. At night, the city transforms. The martyrs' monument glows with red, white, and green lights. The highways turn into rivers of light. The harbor becomes a mirror stretching toward Europe. A lone rower moves through the still waters. His oars trace lines among the painted boats. Beyond the breakwater, the Mediterranean stretches northward toward an ancient continent that once ruthlessly colonized these shores, but now barely remembers its own existence. When you enter Medina, the modern city vanishes like a ghost. The streets are so narrow that two people cannot pass side by side without turning. Ancient stone walls, smoothed by hands over centuries. As you walk, your palm touches the wall. Because of the sun and its captivating history, a warmth envelops your soul and body. Some places are rough, some are polished. You can feel the history within it, not as an idea, as a texture, as a physical thing beneath your skin. The scent changes. Spices, bread, sweat, perfume, all at once. A woman carries a basket of tomatoes on her head. A man sells mint from a wooden cart. A child runs past you, laughing in a language you don't understand. This is Algeria. Not the Algeria in guidebooks, the Algeria that exists when you stop looking for it. The Casbah draws you in. Narrow streets rise steeply between walls that have stood undisturbed since the 1500s. Arched passageways frame beams of light. As the passageways narrow, the air grows cooler. This is a UNESCO World Heritage Site. The Ottomans built it atop an even older structure. The paint peels off in layers, blue over green, over white. Graffiti blooms alongside potted plants hanging from windows no wider than an arm's length. Every surface screams the story of its restoration and abandonment. Though the world may not see the painful story of the generations left behind when empires fell, nature and the people of this civilization feel it through lived experience. The Dar Aziza Palace opens onto a courtyard. Spiral columns, Zalige tilework, appearing machine-made yet exquisitely delicate. A marble fountain catches the sunlight through the arches that have framed this view since the 1500s. Ottoman governors once walked these corridors in splendor. Their footsteps are swallowed by floors paved with geometric patterns that are never exactly repeated. Stairs rise beneath painted ceilings. The corridors narrow into passageways adorned with wooden carvings. Next to the entrance is a crescent-shaped pool. Most visitors pass by without a second glance. But this pool tells a whole philosophy. Light and water etched into stone. Above the Casbah, the Quechua Mosque stands where Maghreb and Byzantine architecture merged centuries ago. Twin minarets rise from tiles and carved stone. The massive wooden doors, each panel hand-carved, have opened and closed through the eras of Ottoman rule, French occupation, and independence. This is the work of a civilization striving to create its own story when left to its own devices and its own history. Further up, the Grand Post glows against the Mediterranean sky in neo-Moorish white. Bougainvilleas frame the facade. In the garden below, a statue of fists breaking chains symbolizes the price of the revolution. In the square, The bronze statue of Emir Abdelkader stands in perpetual motion, horse and rider, a raised sword, frozen against the sky. Every morning, the city awakens around him. The story he began writes another page. You're sitting in a cafe in the Medina. The coffee tastes as if it were made a century ago. An old man is reading his newspaper. He nods at you. You nod back. A woman is carrying potatoes on her head. A delivery truck honks its horn. The city moves around you. Now you too are a part of this ancient city, even if you don't understand the language. Jama el-Jazair rises where the highway meets the coastline. The Great Mosque of Algiers, the third largest mosque in the world. Its minaret reaches a height of 265 meters, Africa's tallest and oldest minaret, and its golden dome reflects the light of the Mediterranean like a second sun. Completed in 2019, this structure is modern Algeria's message to the world. We are still here. We are still building. This civilization has existed through many eras of rebuilding itself, time and again. The complex spreads across well-maintained gardens and geometric plazas. A bridge spans the highway to connect the mosque with the sea. At night, the minaret glows against the dark waters. A vertical beam of light, visible from ships 40 kilometers away, appears. On the hill above the city stands a different ancient monument, the Maqam-e-Shahid, the Martyrs' Monument. 3 concrete wings reaching toward the sky like palm leaves turned to stone. It commemorates with sorrow and gratitude those who died in the war for independence against France. From 1954 to 1962, over 1 million Algerians lost their lives. The monument dominates every vantage point. It serves as a reminder that this nation's modern history was written through sacrifice. Below the monument, the Jardin d'Essai casts its shadow out toward the sea. It is one of Africa's oldest botanical gardens. Families stroll beneath rows of palm trees planted during the era when Algeria was still a colony. The air is filled with the scent of jasmine and eucalyptus. On the hill across from the monument, facing the bay, stands Notre Dame d'Afrique, a Catholic basilica built by the French in 1872. It still stands. Our Lady of Africa, pray for us and for the Muslims. 3 faiths, 3 centuries, a single stretch of coastline. You leave the city behind and head inland. The Mediterranean fades from view. The humidity drops. The air grows thinner. Buildings grow sparse. The noise fades. You climb toward a historic plateau where ancient Roman cities lie abandoned. The stones still stand, astonishingly intact after 2,000 years. The silence around you is so complete that it becomes a sound in itself. Your breathing changes. Your heart beats faster. Your soul will experience this moment as if in meditation. Don't you think so too? The altitude is weighing on you. The landscape is changing. The earth is shifting in color. The vegetation is fading away. The temperature is rising. You're moving towards something ancient, something that has been waiting for you. As you wander through Timgad, you won't hear a single sound. That's the point, really. The city is empty. It has been for centuries. But the stones remember. The amphitheater, the forum, the temples, the baptistry, they're all still standing. It's considered irreplaceable by the world. At its peak, between 12,000 and 23,000 people lived here. Merchants, soldiers, priests. They governed a city with bathhouses, markets, and a sewer system that most medieval European towns wouldn't achieve for another 1,000 years. Wildflowers grow among the stones, once trodden by senators. The columns of the sacred temple of Severus frame the mountains in the background with grandeur. Their surfaces are worn to a honey-brown hue. Stone paths wind through arched passageways that have stood undisturbed for 2,000 years. Marble reflects the afternoon light on the slopes of green grass and scattered poppies. Every carved lintel, every weathered step, they tell of the empire's profitable trade, worship, and just governance at its southern edge. You sit upon one of the ancient stones. You aren't taking photos. You aren't looking at your phone. You're just sitting, listening to the silence. Because this is a meditation. You feel the weight of time pressing down on you. For nearly 2,000 years, these stones have been here that long. For 2,000 years, empires rose and fell. For 2,000 years, people were born and died. And these stones are still here, still standing, still retaining their shapes. And you are here too. For a moment, you're sitting on them. You feel both small and connected. Emperor Trajan founded this place in AD 100 as a retirement colony for Roman legionnaires. The grid is still visible. The streets intersect at perfect right angles, as precise as the day they were measured. The Arch of Trajan rises from among the ruins. An amphitheater carved into the hillside retains its shape 19 centuries later. They built it to last, and it did. In western Algeria, the ruins take on a different character. In Taza, Roman columns rise not from arid plains, but from coastal pine forests. The turquoise Mediterranean glistens behind every arch. The ancient city stretches along a rocky coastline. A road once lined with columns still extends toward the sea. A solitary figure strides majestically through a stone-arched passage toward the sunlight filtering through cypress and wild olive trees. The ruins here are not fenced off, nor are they staged. They simply exist. Ruined walls with roots growing through them. A weathered tree leaning against a fallen column capital. Why doesn't anyone come here? Why doesn't anyone see this? The answer is simple. The world moved on, but the stones did not. Yet a civilization is not made of stones alone. Constantine was boldly built by people who refused to accept the constraints of geography. The city sits atop a limestone plateau, split in two by the Rumel Gorge, as if someone had placed it there. A massive cliff plunges hundreds of meters down from the very heart of the city. It's like a wound that has never healed. The buildings appear to cling to the edges of the cliff on both sides. Their foundations disappear into the vertical rock face. The roads end at the edge of the cliff. The only way to cross, bridges. 7 of them span the void at varying heights. Each one is a challenge. It is almost a test of civilization's engineering prowess and grandeur. The most impressive is Sidi Masjid, a suspension bridge hanging 175 meters above the gorge's floor. The Rumel River has been carving through the limestone for millions of years. Lush vegetation clings to the rock surfaces below. The sound of the water rises gently from depths the eye can barely reach. People cross this bridge every day. The sound of their footsteps is swallowed by the wind. Some do not look down. Nearby, an old stone bridge stands face to face with a modern one. Engineering from different centuries tackles the same impossible problem. The old arch, built in the era when Constantinople was still called Sirta, retains its curve as it reaches toward the sky. Apartment blocks stand on the edge of the cliff, as if defying gravity. An abandoned factory leans toward the valley. Its chimney traces its silhouette against the sky. The Mela Bridge connects to a domed structure embedded in the rock face. It did not conform to Constantine's geography. It fought against it. It built upon the wounds. This is still Algeria. You're heading south again, into the depths of the Sahara. The landscape changes with every kilometer. Vegetation disappears. The soil changes color. The temperature rises. The air dries out. You're moving toward the edge of the world. At least, that's how it feels. The Sahara is not a single thing. It is a series of transformations, an encyclopedia of emotions containing a series of life stories. First, the plateau, then the oasis cities, then the canyons, then the rock formations, then the sand dunes. Each one more extreme than the last. Each one peels away another layer of what you thought you knew about the world. The silence deepens. The air grows thin. The light grows harsh. You're moving towards something, a wisdom that most people can't reach. Located 60 kilometers south of Algiers in the Blida Atlas Mountains, Ghardaïa National Park is lost in a fog so thick it obscures the tree line. The cedar forest rises from slopes that most visitors to this country never reach. Ancient, dense, covered in moss, the roads vanish into the fog. The air is dominated by the scent of wet tree bark and earth. The Atlas cedar is a species unique to these mountains. Some specimens have stood here like heirlooms for over 800 years. Their trunks are wider than a car. Their crowns skillfully filter the light into green-gold columns. Above the cloud line, Ghardaïa Mountain rises into a clear and bright sky. The forest floor is hidden beneath a layer of fallen leaves. An abandoned cable car cabin sways among the branches. It rusts silently. Nature reclaims what humans have left behind. In the Atlas valleys, waterfalls cascade from moss-covered rocks into dark pools. The water turns black due to tannins. At dawn, sunbeams pierce through the canopy. They illuminate the dirt roads winding toward the peaks, which glisten golden in the first light. The Tel Atlas stretches toward the coast, green and layered, ridge upon ridge. It vanishes into the mist. This is not the Algerian Sahara. This is the other one, the green one, the hidden one, the one that shatters every assumption. On the mountain meadows, cattle graze behind crumbling stone walls. The mist clings to the peaks above. On a nearby slope, the ruins of an abandoned village are slowly returning to the earth. Stone walls softened by ivy, gates opening to the sky. These mountains are not empty. People who have no need to attract the world's attention live here in silence. Below, in the city of Blida, the Alcala Mosque rises against a dramatic sky, its arches adorned with gold. In Algeria, civilization does not end where the desert begins. It begins where the mountains begin. Far to the northeast, Alcala National Park stretches across wetlands, lakes, and coastal forests. A Ramsar site, one of the most important migratory bird corridors in the Western Mediterranean. Beneath the drone, the marshes shimmer like a patch of green and brown. Flocks of birds take flight from the reeds in waves that ripple across the water like the wind. Horses and cattle graze on the meadows at the edge of the wetland. in an environment undisturbed by the thousands of wings passing overhead. The landscape here resembles Ireland more than North Africa, undulating, damp, incredibly green. In the higher reaches of the Atlas Mountains, Lake Tlemcen sits at the summit, like a mirror placed on the mountaintop. Green slopes stretch down to the lake's shores. For miles on end, the only sign of human presence is a solitary tent. This is the quietest place in Algeria, a country holding its breath between the mountains and the sky. Algeria's coastline stretches for more than 1,600 kilometers along the Mediterranean Sea. It is longer than Spain's. It is longer than Italy's. In Oran, golden cliffs plunge into waters whose clarity shifts between turquoise and sapphire, depending on the time of day. Rocky islands cut through the water's surface in the open sea. Their edges are whitened by sea foam, and seagulls circle around them. To the east of the coastline, the city of Ghardaïa sits where the mountains meet the sea. Morning fog blankets everything. The landscape is vertical. The peaks vanish into the clouds. Forests stretch down toward the shores. The coastline is so rugged that it twists and folds like crumpled paper. In Jijel, sandy coves are hidden among the cliffs. Skikda's beaches capture the sunset in a golden glow. As the light begins to fade, people gather by the water's edge. Families, fishermen, couples walking barefoot where the Mediterranean meets North Africa. On the cliffs near Ghardaïa, Barbary macaques sit on the ledges above the sea, Algeria's only primate. They watch the waves with an innate indifference honed over thousands of years. They eagerly take food from people's hands without hesitation. Their ancient eyes, unchanged since before the first ships crossed these waters. And in Oran, Algeria's second-largest city, the Santa Cruz fortress stands like a crown atop the hill. Its statue overlooks the urban sprawl below and the harbor. The Mediterranean stretches northward toward Europe, a body of water that, as far as anyone can remember, has both connected and separated these two continents. South of the Atlas Mountains, the landscape slopes toward the Sahara. A different Algeria emerges. Ghardaïa, the Mzab Valley. 5 fortified cities built over 1,000 years ago by the Mozabite Berbers, protected by an international decree, unchanged by their own choices. Brown and white buildings cluster in concentric circles around the minarets. It's as if each city has grown outward from the mosque, like waves in the sand. Palm trees filter through the walls. Covered markets cast shade on streets designed to deflect the sun. The Mozabites developed an extremely delicate water distribution system that still functions today. Channels carved into the rock, cisterns hidden beneath courtyards. In a valley where it rains perhaps 3 times a year, every drop counts. The architecture here is not mere decoration. It is a struggle for survival made of plaster and stone. Further south, Timgad, where the Sahara has swallowed a town. At golden hour, the clay buildings glow orange against the sand dunes, rising behind the settlement like frozen waves. The sand stops right at the edge of the last house. Or perhaps the town reached the edge of the sand and decided this was far enough. Date palms fill the valley floor between the sand dunes, the old town, and the river. The seasonal river draws a green line across a landscape that is otherwise amber-colored. At sunset, the shadows of the sand dunes stretch over the town like the fingers of a closing hand. Tassili, Niger is located in southeastern Algeria, where the Sahara transitions from sand to rock. Renowned for both its geology and prehistoric art, it is a unique region listed on 2 separate World Heritage lists. Sandstone plateaus, carved by the wind over millions of years, rise from the desert floor. They possess such peculiar shapes that you feel as though the hands of the people who built the Egyptian pyramids had touched them. They appear as if they were designed. Mushroom-shaped towers, natural arches, rock corridors that twist and narrow into passages so narrow you can barely squeeze through. 10,000 years ago, this place was green. Rivers flowed through these canyons. The people who lived here depicted their world on the rock. Cattle, dancers, hunters, rain. Over 15,000 cave paintings have survived to the present day, the world's largest open-air prehistoric art gallery. The paintings remain, the rivers are gone. A lone figure walks toward a rock arch shaped like an elephant, Tassili's most iconic formation. Viewed from the air, the human figure appears as a mere speck against the geology measured in millennia. Nearby, sandstone pillars stand like sentinels in the mist. Their surfaces have eroded into textures that shift with the light. Amber-colored at midday, violet at twilight, black beneath the stars. Reaching Tassili requires an expedition. Convoys of 4x4 vehicles pass through narrow canyons. Sandstone walls rise on either side. Tire tracks in the sand are the only evidence that anyone has passed through here. Even they vanish by morning. The silence here is not empty. It is dense, textured, almost physical. The sound of a landscape that has been breathing for 10 million years. At sunset, the rock changes color every few minutes, from amber to copper, then to violet. It traverses the color spectrum of a dying fire. The wind picks up. The sand hisses as it scrapes against the rock that has listened to this sound for 10 million years. It doesn't feel like Tassili of Africa. It doesn't feel like Earth. It feels like the memory of a planet that once had water, forests, and people who believed the rain would never stop. You stand before 15,000-year-old paintings. You're not just looking at art, you're looking at a direct connection to people who lived 15,000 years ago. You're looking at their hands. You're looking into their eyes. This place makes you feel as though you're on a journey with Picasso, Aristotle, and Michelangelo. You're looking at what they deemed important enough to draw on a cave wall and leave for future generations. The weight of time bears down on you. 15,000 years. That's longer than the entire history of civilization. That's longer than the entire history of writing. That's longer than the entire recorded history of human experience. And these paintings are still here, still visible, still awe-inspiring. Why did they paint? What were they trying to say? The answer is written in the pigment and the stone, and it's still speaking. South of everything, south of the Oasis towns, south of the canyon roads, south of the last cell tower. The Ajjer Mountains rise from the Saharan plateau like monuments to a forgotten age. Black, jagged volcanic peaks stretch out into a landscape of red and ochre-colored rocks. Mount Tahat, sacred to the Tuareg, catches the last rays of the setting sun. It holds on to the light long after the valleys below have been swallowed by darkness. In Ghardaïa, the landscape resembles Mars. Red mesas and canyon walls, layered over geological time, stretch toward horizons that can never be reached. Camping tents stand like dwarfs beneath the rocky outcrops that began eroding long before humanity existed. At sunset, the sky turns turquoise against the backdrop of golden-hued rocks. The silence is so complete, it feels as though it's pressing against your ears. And then, the sand dunes. The Sahara, in its purest, most absolute form. Wavy patterns stretch toward every horizon in such delicate parallel lines they appear as if combed. The wind moves the sand in visible waves. It reshapes the surface hour by hour. As the sun rises, the shadows of the sand dunes divide the landscape into sharp planes of gold and violet. Geometry written by physics, erased by physics, rewritten before noon. The scale is unimaginable. Individual dunes reach heights of 300 meters. They are taller than most buildings in Algeria. The sea of sand covers an area larger than Western Europe. In the middle, days pass in utter solitude, without a single human footprint. Here, the wind is the sole narrator. It speaks in a language older than any civilization that has ever attempted to cross this land. Yet life goes on as it always has. Camel caravans traverse the sand dunes. Dozens of herds, led by blue-robed Tuareg guides, whose families have navigated these routes for centuries without maps. Viewed from above, the camels cast long shadows across the sand, a spiritual procession that appears ancient, impossible, and yet entirely real. A Tuareg man adjusts his turban against the wind. Another guides his herd through a pass between sand dunes that won't exist tomorrow. These aren't tourists reenacting a tradition. These are people whose connection to the desert is measured in generations, not Instagram posts. Modern Algeria meets the ancient desert with passion. An ATV speeds past a camel caravan. It scatters sand into the air that has been still for 1,000 years. A lone tree whose silhouette emerges against the dusty sky, the only vertical object stretching for miles. At sunset, 2 birds cross the horizon of the sand dunes. Their wing beats are the only movement in this scene, which looks like a painting. And on an untouched dune ridge, plastic bottles. Here, even at the edge of the habitable world, human footprints precede humans. Now you're heading back north, toward the coast, toward the city, toward the airport. The journey is coming to an end. The desert gives way to the plateau. The highlands give way to the hills. The hills give way to the coast. The Mediterranean comes into view on the horizon. You know you've almost returned to where you started, but you're no longer the person you were when you arrived. Something has changed. Your sense of distance has changed. Your sense of time has changed. Your sense of scale has changed. You feel small, but at the same time, you're connected to everything around you. You're connected to the people you met in Medina. You're connected to the silence of Timgad. You're connected to the rhythm of Ghardaïa. You're connected to the rock art of Tassili. You are connected to the stars above the Sahara. You are connected to the entire history of the human experience. Do you remember the beginning? You could taste the salty water spray at breakfast. You ate couscous for lunch. You watched the desert turn crimson at sunset. You witnessed moments like those in a romantic movie. You came here thinking you'd see a country, but what you actually did was experience something that changed your perspective on the world. Not facts, not statistics, not information, but the feeling of moving through a landscape. The feeling of sitting in a cafe and drinking coffee. The feeling of walking among ancient ruins. The feeling of watching a grandmother pick tomatoes. the feeling of standing before 15,000-year-old paintings. The feeling of watching the sun set over the Sahara Desert. That's what you take with you. That's what changes you. That's what makes you different when you leave than when you arrived. And if this journey has moved you, if this experience in Algeria has changed your perspective on the world, then subscribe. Because there are more journeys like this. There are more places like this. There are more experiences that will change your perspective on everything. Headlines call this place closed. Stones call this place home. People call this place their own. Algeria isn't a destination. It's a transformation. A place where empires left their fingerprints and the desert left its silence. This is a place where you arrive as a tourist and leave as a witness. The world will continue to call this place the North Korea of the Sahara. But you will know better. You'll know that behind the borders and bureaucracy lies something the world has forgotten to see. Not the one the headlines tell, the story the stones remember.